This presentation on autistic burnout and dissociation was part of a monthly meeting for the Northwest Suburbs chapter of the International Society for Trauma and Dissociation. It's a presentation I did for other therapists. Just a heads up, the client examples are not exact in all detail and are designed to preserve anonymity.
So when a threatening situation does not stop, and we judge that we judge we cannot escape the threat, or after a period of high unbearable anxiety or anger, if that goes on long enough, or if the pathways have been developed early in life for whatever reason, because there was constant barrage of threat that could not be escaped, our nervous system goes into a mode of shutdown and collapse. And in this mode, that dorsal vagus nerve, the part in the back of your body with your organs, sends signals to the rest of your body, including your brain, to conserve us energy. And our body generates natural painkillers, cannabis and opiates, by the way. And we just shut down. And basically most of the activity, which means parts that get shut down are the parts holding on to emotion and the parts responsible for thinking. So your body basically goes into survival mode. And in this state, you are minimally aware of other people. You do not desire connection. It's hard to care about anything. It's also very difficult to concentrate or focus because the energy going to your brain is like not much. So, and I have seen extreme cases of this where somebody that when they're not in this state, like I have a client right now and her IQ, oh my gosh, I don't even know. Well, she's interesting. It's interesting with her because she has DID and autism, and her IQ has got to be like 130, 140. But when I first started working with her, she was in a state of collapse where she could not remember her own address. And so it can really, really compromise your ability to think. And this is also a state of constant exhaustion, no matter how much rest you get. So up on here on the top here, I like to talk about people who live in the lower edge of that red curve, and people who live and people who either live or get pushed up to the top. I suspect that a lot of people with complex trauma and autism live on that just right above freeze when it says raised pain threshold, numbness, going through the motions, checked out, they're functioning a lot of the time, that's just ordinary. And that might be even experienced as good because in those moments you're exempt from extreme anxiety or aggravation. So it might be hard to think, you might feel like, well, I'm not my sharpest, I get foggy a little bit, but you're also not feeling a lot of pain. But, you're also experiencing connection in this muted kind of way. But then when something really bad happens, or if there's a constant sources of things dragging you back down there to the rage and panic, anxiety and fear, then your nervous system is like, this is intolerable, and jumps up to that top of that parabola where you're stuck in a more extreme shutdown state, which I would, put more where that burnout lives. And also the client I was describing for sure where she was living. And in that state, and this is more extreme, the higher up you are on that red, the more extreme you are on this curve. The whole point is like, this is the state that a mammal's body goes in when a predator is about to eat you. And so if that's the case, you're not thinking about the threat because there's no point because you can't escape. So you don't need your brain to be doing much. And and when this is occurring to a person, they don't know why they're there. They don't know they're under threat. They're not thinking about threat because they can't think about hardly anything. The only thing is to keep your heart beating and pain relief is the purpose of this state, okay? So in this, all the way through the state, you're having those natural opioids and cannabinoids going. The whole point is to conserve metabolic resources so you don't feel things. Your heart rate's down, your blood pressure's down, your temperature's down. Often when I use this chart with clients a lot, and when I'm trying to help them figure out what's going on, I'll ask them how hot or cold they are. The muscle tone, your muscles get kind of floppy. Your facial expression is kind of just flat and you don't tend to make eye contact. If you watch people breathing, it's very little bit in and a very little bit out. Decreased social behavior. Well, the person doesn't want to socialize, but also they're not reading any signals of other people at this point. Even if, even if you're not neurodivergent, like at this point, you can't take in other people. And it says low attunement to human voice, meaning, you're not reading whether someone's warm, judgmental, or whatever at this point, if you're high enough in this red space. You're certainly not interested in sex, and your immune system's crap. So, not good. So, what is autistic burnout? This is why I was very interested when I was hearing about autistic burnout, because of the crossover. I was looking for resources on autistic burnout. It's talked about a lot on the internet. There are some early studies. This is one paragraph from one in 2020. Autistic burnout is characterized by pervasive, long-term, typically 3 or more months, exhaustion, loss of function, and reduced tolerance to stimuli. People describe negative impacts on their lives, including health, capacity for independent living, and quality of life, including suicidal behavior. They also discussed a lack of empathy from neurotypical people. People had ideas for recovering, including acceptance and social support, time off, reduced expectations, and doing things in an autistic way, i.e. unmasking. Okay, there's a lot there. All right, this list I stole from someone on Reddit, but I thought it was amazing, and also an excellent description of one person's, right? But it fits with what happens if you're in that deeper red place. Fuzzy, foggy brain, feeling done with the day, taking excessive naps, not wanting to talk or going mute, acting clumsy, can't cook or only can cook comfort foods. Everything feels complicated. Everything is too loud. So I suspect with autism, one push into autistic burnout is, again, that sensory barrage without relief. Frustration with the state of the world, depression, preservation, catastrophizing, panic attacks, which would be like that bit into that high yellow and then back up to the high red. Dissociation, overuse of alcohol, physical illness, again, immune system down, poor language skills, again, low prefrontal cortex down, low patience tolerance, poor, quick, desperate decisions. That's probably, again, when you're spiking into that high yellow. Low spoon count. For anyone who doesn't know, many people in the disability communities of different kinds talk about this idea that you have a certain amount of spoons per day, and like you run out after. So every demand requires a spoon, and then you only have a certain amount. Low capacity to plan and execute, definitely prefrontal cortex, insomnia, or taking excessive naps, both sleep problems, and quitting, withdrawing from groups, projects, places, plans, because it's too much. So I found this interesting, that when I was reading, okay, well, what do they recommend for autistic burnout? This is just my observation, that many of the recommendations implicitly include creating an environment that feels safer and less threatening to an autistic person. So one is learning to unmask. And the bullet points are just my thoughts on why this is related to safety. Taking risks to be oneself and seek acceptance opens up the possibility of interpersonal safety through acceptance versus interpersonal behavior being a performance where failure is always an option. Yes, so masking, that faking, pretend, trying to be neurotypical, implies the constant threat of failing to mask, and unmasking, you remove that threat. This also, over time, reduces internalized stigma and shame, which increases a sense of safety. 2, increasing sensory awareness of sensory overload and taking steps to avoid overwhelm. I think when working with an autistic person, especially somebody diagnosed later in life, it is likely that they've had to dissociate how much sensory overwhelm they experience. And working with several people, more than, I don't know, I've worked, at least 5 or 6 people on this in my long-term caseload. When I first asked about sensory distress, I've had a number of people first tell me, like, oh, I don't think I have much. And then the next week come back with this long list of things that basically was in the back of their mind always there, but it had never been named as children or seen as something real. So when something is not seen as real, basically, so it had been dissociated, like always. So it was like this background noise. Um, so masking requires to push it back. Social expectations require you to push it back. Well, again, there's no relief. And if there's no relief, it's like constantly this fight or flight sympathetic activation is happening, whether or not you're attuned with it. So helping people to mindfully be aware of their sensory distress is actually really helpful. Um, and these other lists, okay, and then other things on the list. 3, self-awareness of social overwhelm and taking time alone when necessary. Again, if you do a lot of masking, you may not realize, oh, wait, like I can't do anything more socially now. And so then again, you're overwhelming your nervous system with too much. And so that self-awareness piece, if people work on it, removes the threat of exposing oneself to interpersonal stress without relief. 4, spending time on one's own interest was recommended. And then I want to go back to the vagus nerve. That is, spending time on your interests, focusing on things that, that you're learning and you're creating. That's vagus nerve stimulation, which increases one's ability to feel safety physiologically. Other thing that nurture the vagus nerve can help, although I will add, if you are strongly stuck in yellow or red, these things might not help. Or in the moment that you're strongly stuck, especially in red, if you're in that red numb state and you try to do these things that nurture the vagus nerve, it may not hit because you need to feel a certain amount of distress to get relief from the distress. And so if you're in that red zone of numbing, and you try to do these things, you're just going to feel like kind of disconnected from them. It's going to feel like it's going through the motions. So these are things that decrease distress. And I would just offer that as a, one thing that I've been, since learning about polyvagal theory, I've been trying to incorporate myself and talking to people about is, as therapists, we naturally give people these recommendations for things. They're almost all vagus nerve things. And if your nervous system is working, they feel good. Yoga, connecting with your animals, listening to music, creating art, spending time in nature, finding your spirituality. If your nervous system is locked down, those things will not be pleasurable. And this can increase people's sense of feeling alienated and feeling different and feeling like there's something very wrong with them. And so it's important to know that you have to be at least somewhat in that yellow zone to experience the relief of the green. And also for everyone, that will be different. In the autistic community, there's specific things that are talked about that are calming, happy place kind of things, including your stims, including, your special interest area, including certain sensory things that you crave in terms of sensory things. But again, it matters what your nervous system state is, and that's why we can help people to be aware of where they are on that red, yellow, green chart. Also for number 4 here, I would add the safe and sound protocol. Is incredibly good at helping that vagus nerve get that waxy coating, which then helps people to more easily get to this sense of physiological safety in that green zone. Okay, and then the final one, make realistic goals, reduce responsibilities if necessary. And if you're masking all the time, this is really hard. I have a client right now who's in college, and his expectations of himself to be, this straight A student and involved in these clubs and this and that are just a mismatch for the autism and are too much. And the ADHD in his case. And there's trauma, which is, how I got him. Well, and actually he's trans. So there's all kinds of intersections again that we're talking about. And so talking to this idea of, well, what if you lowered this expectation, but every time he has an IP and everything, has to ask the professor for the deadline, or has to, there's that feeling of failure, and then there's shame, and then there's a threat of shame, which also sets off his nervous system. And so that acceptance of, okay, look, you can't cookie cutter yourself and try to be this person that you're not. If something is hard for you, that's not hard for other people. That just is. But people feel a lot of stigma and shame because there is a ton of that in society. So reducing realistic goals, that idea may initially get resistance and may initially cause the person to feel shame. So that has to be along with, psychoeducation about what is normal to have difficulties with, and, work on self-acceptance.
Thank you for watching part 3 of my presentation on autistic burnout and dissociation. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, I'd really encourage you to do so. If you're interested, click on the link below and subscribe.
So